Here are the ingredients to make rough puff or flaky pastry. You need strong plain flour, some lemon juice, some salt, and then a hard fat such as butter. I'm going to show you how to make rough puff or flaky pastry. There's two slightly different methods, but the first thing is to get your strong plain flour. You're also going to need to add into it half a teaspoon of salt. And the salt is going to add flavour into your pastry. And then I'm going to need to have my cold water that I've measured. And into that I'm going to need to add a teaspoon of lemon juice. Now the lemon, it can be from a fresh lemon or from one of these, doesn't matter, a container. And the lemon juice actually strengthens the gluten in the pastry. And then the next thing I'm going to need is to get my butter. Now I'm using salted butter because it's a savoury product. If you wanted to, you could use hard margarine, but definitely not a soft margarine. The butter is going to add the colour and the flavour into the mixture. Now I'm going to complicate my slightly today and make the more slightly more difficult flaky pastry rather than rough puff. So what I've got is my butter here, and I need to divide it into 4. Okay, it doesn't have to be exact, but roughly into 4. I'm then going to take the first quarter and I'm going to rub that into the mixture. At the same time, I'm going to tell you how you can make rough puff pastry, which is the slightly easier version. So here's my butter going in, okay, and I'm basically going to go cut it up and to rub it in. If I wanted to make the easy rough puff version, I would have added all of my fat in at the same time. And then I would have cut it up into cubes, like you would normally when you're going to rub in. However, I would have left the cubes that big and I would have stirred all of it into the mixture, and then I would have added in my cold water. I would not have rubbed in the squares, the cubes, the fat, okay? So I would have had a lumpy dough. As I say, I'm going to make mine into flaky pastry just so you can see that as well. So instead though, I'm going to, as normal, just rub my fat in. Now, as I said, the fat is going to add colour and flavour into the pastry. There's also the option, if you eat lard, to use half lard and to add half of a yellow fat. What that does is it makes your pastry a little bit shorter, a little bit more flaky. But the lard, if you remember, doesn't add any flavour into your pastry. If you don't want lard, you could use another white vegetable fat such as Trex instead, and again that has the same effect. I'm just going to use butter in mine because I like a nice rich result. Now this pastry can be made into sweet things or into savoury things, even though we've got the salt in there, because sometimes having the sweet with the salt is a nice mixture. Now if you remember, I had my strong plain flour. I need a reasonable amount of protein in my flour because I want the pastry to stretch. Now you might recall when we did a little bit about bread that the proteins that are found in flour are glutenin and gliadin, and when you add water into them they make the gluten. Okay, so that's my mixture rubbed in. I've got rid of all the big lumps. The next stage for me in my pastry is going to add in the water. So I've still got my fat to the side, but that doesn't matter. The water is now going to go in. And I need enough just to make a dough, in the same way as I do when I make short crust pastry. I want to be able to pick up all of the mixture from the sides of the bowl. So my mixture now is all stuck together in one ball. And the next stage is going to be for me to roll this out. So remember, I've still got my other fat on the side. If you were making rough puff, you'd still have the same dough as me. It would still look the same. Okay, next stage then is to put some flour onto your table to make sure your dough is reasonably smooth. You don't want to over knead it, but you want it to be smooth start with. It's quite likely going to have lumps of butter in if you're making the rough puff, don't forget. Okay, next stage then. I've cut it into a rectangle shape. And then I'm going to get my rolling pin, I'm going to roll it out, and I want to keep it in a long, thin strip. So I may have to turn it, I may have to put a tiny bit of flour down if it's sticky. But I want it to be almost as long as the rolling pin. That's what I'm aiming to do. And I'll show you how big that is in just a moment. It doesn't need to be very wide. Okay. So there's my rolling pin. You can see how long it is and the fact that it's not very wide. The next stage is going to be for me to add on some fat. So you can see now I've added my fat. The next stage is for me to actually fold and shape this. Now if you're making the rough puff, you won't have this fat in there, but the process is exactly the same. Okay. So you take the bottom third and you fold that across up to the top third. Like that. And then you take the top third and you fold that into the centre. And then you turn it round so that it looks like a book. And then using your rolling pin, you press it to seal it in, like so. And then you re-roll it. I've re-rolled it into the same size and shape. And again, if you've got rough puff, you're simply going to fold yours. I've got my flaky pastry, so I'm going to add in the fat again. So it's the same process again. I've added in the second part of the fat. So it's going to be take the bottom, take the top, turn it round like a book, seal in the edges so none of the fat escapes, put a little line through the centre, and then re-roll again. I've added in my final third of pastry and I've folded it over. I just wanted to show you what it looked like again inside. So exactly the same again now. I'm going to fold it, squish it at the sides, press down the centre, and then I'm going to re-roll. Now I've got to re-roll it now 3 more times without adding any more fat. Okay, and that's actually basically spreading out the fat that's in there. And then I'll be able to fold it back up in exactly the same way as it is now, and then put that into a bag and chill it. So here is my finished pastry. I did 3 more rolls without adding any more fat, which means I've got a considerable amount of layers now, because every time I fold it into this position, I add 3 more layers. So I did 3 rolls I should say, without any fat, so that gives me 9, and I added in 3 additions of fat. So you can see this is how you get your flaky pastry or rough puff. The idea is now that all the space in between those lumps of fat will have air pockets, and that's what's going to help give you the nice rise. But also when the moisture, the steam is produced during the baking of the pastry, the steam will also go into those small air pockets as the fat melts, and it will produce a rise on your pastry, and that's where you get the nice light airy flaky pastry. It's now going to go into the fridge in the bag until the fat hardens again. Now this could be at least an hour. If you're doing it at home, it could be overnight. If you want to try and speed it up a little bit, you could always put it into the freezer.